I've read in several places that it's the fastest growing disease in the Western world. So dopamine does predominantly three things, but most of the viewers and most of what people will see in their social media is, my main concern was, is this hereditary for the kids? But there's a lot of people out there that are really, really incapacitated by this disease. And they're going to think Parkinson's is...
Okay, on the show today, Scott Hanley, so he's a platform speaker, might say thought leader, background in the British military and known for his battle with Parkinson's. This is a subject quite close to my heart because of my mentor, Paul Linden, and, you know, him suffering from this. It's going to be quite emotional for me, I think, talking about it with Scott, but also just a really positive message. We're going to be talking CrossFit, psychology, and a bunch of other stuff. So, Scott, welcome.
Mark, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I wasn't aware that you had a personal relationship with this, albeit by third party, with this disease. But thank you.
I've had a mentor in the coaching space and therapy space who has had Parkinson's for some time. He's quite open about it. He even makes jokes about it. And I've over 20 years have seen his deterioration, which I think, like you, has been dramatically helped and slowed by movement and various kind of mindfulness practices, but it's still, you know, it's hard to see in someone. It's not a bag of laughs, is it, as far as I can tell?
No, as will come out, I'd imagine, over the next 30 minutes. I didn't get to the really shit awful stage, but it's pretty brutal. There's 5 stages with this disease. 5, you're in the terminal area, and your quality of life is pretty weak, pretty poor. I got to stage 2 before I acted on it, with a combination of mindset and physical, and a wee bit of diet as well, what I was putting into my body. So stage 2 was as far as I got. Lots of symptoms, lots of things that were pretty shit and you didn't want to have in your life, but relative to those people who are further up the curve or down the curve, depending on how you're looking at it. I've been very fortunate.
And you had a pretty active background before diagnosis, right? Military, sports.
Throughout my life, not overly sedentary, always not sort of sitting down on the sofa watching Ant and Dec and digging in with a bag of Doritos on a Saturday night. Normally fairly active, yes.
And I'm actually fairly ignorant of the science. I mean, as I understand it, as far as different brain regions involved, different biochemistry, I think it's dopamine. And is Parkinson's one of those things like, I don't know, chlamydia, that has a certain tests that they know if you've got it or not? Or is it more like a condition that's kind of a bit more vague than that?
Oh, chlamydia, I love that. I've not been tested for chlamydia that I'm aware of. So, yeah, there is. Okay, so, excuse me. Parkinson's is where a part of your brain, which is a physical part of your body, called your substantia nigra. And the substantia nigra is responsible for the production and transmission of dopamine. Now, Mark, what do you think of, or what do you think a lot of your listeners would think of when I say the word dopamine?
We had on from Dopamine Nation who talks about addiction a lot, but as I understand it, it's any kind of directed movement as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. That was a great podcast. I listened to that, and I've read a bit of Anna's work previously. So dopamine does predominantly 3 things, but most of the viewers and most of what people will see in their social media is the highs and the lows and getting the buzz on and feeling gratification and reward. But one of the less talked about aspects of dopamine, it is also the command signal that sends out through neurotransmitters. Dopamine is kind of like the software in the computer, Mark, where it sends out the command signals. So I involuntarily raised my hand there to scratch my nose. So that wasn't a conscious decision, but dopamine was knocking out command signals through your neurotransmitters. And there's pretty much movement in everything we do. So as you're breathing, lungs, it's a motor function. Swallowing, your digestive tract, pretty much everything requires motor symptoms. So Parkinson's is, I don't have enough dopamine. It's not being transmitted in an efficient manner. So computer says no sometimes. And is there you don't go to the STI clinic for it. I went to nuclear medicine and I got a particular type of brain scan. It's called a DAT scan, a dopamine activator transporter scan, something like that. Pretty groovy. It's like out of the matrix. It's a 3D live view of your brain activity. So I was told by UK and NHS, which is the only treatment I've had, the only exposure I've had medically, excuse me, that's the empirical evidence for dopamine. So yeah, I went through the brain scanner to get a DAT scan, and the results of that, they could see that there was not the normal brain activity in that part of my body, of my brain. And it was that I was then told, right, you've got Parkinson's. So, I mean, it's batshit crazy, the science and all this.
Can we?
And quite how your brain scan would look differently.
No,
I don't know.
Multiple CT scans and MRI scans. The MRI scans aren't much fun, but I'm going back to that moment of being diagnosed. So when you hear a word like cancer or Parkinson's, for most people, they might not know much about it, but it's kind of a terrifying word. Like, how was that moment when they said, hey, you may have had these shakes, you didn't know what's going on, so we brought you in, you've got Parkinson's?
Yeah, I think my answer will surprise many, as it has in my own personal circle. Two things. By the time it got to the brain scanner and the month or two that it took to get results, I think it worked out what it was. I kind of knew it was Parkinson's, because over that period from going to my GP and actually being told the diagnosis of the scan, I think it worked it out. So was I mentally prepared? Yeah, to a degree. So whenever I actually got the call saying, we confirm you've got Parkinson's, it wasn't big news. It wasn't big news. It was what I expected. The second part of my response, yeah, I mean, it was pretty scary. Thought my main concern was, is this hereditary for the kids? But looking back, what I did, not in the moment, but over the coming, the next few weeks, I was told, I think 4, 5, 6 days before Christmas. So coming into the new year, kids went back to university and I had my appointment looming with a consultant. I made an active decision. It was a very conscious decision. And that was, you're not going to let this disease define you. It's not going to screw up my life. And I put a flag in the ground, or that was a really, really active choice that I made. And, you go into all this support material, and as you'd expect, a lot of people get quite worried, quite stressed, quite anxious. People find the diagnosis quite debilitating. And I hope I'm not coming across as a complete prick here, but I chose not to. That was a conscious choice. And I think that's been no small part of why I've been on meds for 4 years and I've been sitting free pretty much for over 3 years.
You've done some mindset stuff previously, I'm imagining, in leadership positions elsewhere, and was like, okay, how I approach this is going to be really impactful.
Yeah, I had, both in the corporate world and training at Sandhurst and training, being a British Army officer whenever I was 2 stone younger and had hair.
Sandhurst is the British Military Academy, like West Point for American listeners.
Yeah, Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. So I think that was just in my DNA. You know, I didn't hear the news, or whenever I'm dealing with other hard things, I've had other traumatic experiences. I don't know what your definition of trauma is, Matt or Gab. Gabor Mata even would have a very different definition of it. But I didn't consciously say, right, you know, I must now adapt this process. But at an unconscious level, I've had quite a bit of training and quite a bit of experience. And I think I've dealt with hard shit quite well looking back.
Mm-hmm. Parkinson's seems to be on the rise statistically from the numbers I've seen. Do we know what causes it?
No. There's no clue about that. I'm getting the same information that I've read in several places, that it's the fastest growing disease in the Western world, but they really don't know what's causing it. There's conjecture, there's opinion, but there's nothing. There's not really a consensus, right? You know, this is the stuff that's doing it. Probably the most, I don't know, exciting, but the most solid evidence of, right, this is how we might treat it. I think that's going to come out of the US, and it's all going to be down to gut and gut biome stuff. So does that mean it's diet related? I don't know. I should have said this at the beginning. I'm not a medical person, so this is just my lived experience. So obviously I'm very informed about this, and I read a lot, but this is just lived experience. So I can't give a medical opinion on that.
A policy on the podcast that we don't give out medical advice unless someone is, you know, and I think it's really, really ethical of you to be clear about that. I love that. So in terms of your actual experience of this, then, what was there a degradation in terms of symptomology, and what helped you?
Early symptoms were a bit of a tremor, but not constant. Normally, whenever I was at rest, so if you're busy and you're always moving, it didn't present, and I was really good at masking it. I've had a bit of training on that as well, and what I call sticky feet, where your foot just sticks to the footpath or wherever you are, and the rest of your body moves, but my right foot doesn't. So there's a few hairy moments there. I was parked my car on a busy road and got out, and there was oncoming traffic, and tried to sneak out with the door open. Then my right foot stuck, and I collapsed into the road. So what I call sticky feet. There was once again at rest, mostly in the evenings, a lot of leg tremors and cramps as well. So those were the early stage symptoms. And then one question I keep on being asked, and I've yet to give a concrete answer on, is why did I piss around for 3 years and why did it take me so long to act on and do what I did, which has been highly effective? And I don't really know. So I really had, about 3 years where the symptoms just deteriorated. So that would then go to erectile dysfunction, thankfully very occasional urinary incontinence, nightmares. Don't ask me why lack of dopamine gives people nightmares, but it does. Sleep and fatigue were an absolute bitch. That was really, really, that was possibly the most debilitating thing. Just a complete fog and, no clue and disoriented.
It's underestimated that way. I have a lot of listeners that have post-COVID fatigue or various kinds of other fatigue, and it just seems to be really crushing for people.
Yeah, it is. And so I'm sat in my office, which is on a road that I've known for 20 years. And I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was driving back from a meeting and I was just so confused. I pulled my car over and pulled a business card out of my wallet and typed my address into Google Maps on my phone when I was 200 meters from my office. But I had no bloody clue how to get there prior to doing that. And that was tested to make sure I didn't have early Alzheimer's, but it was just put down to sleep deprivation. Oh, it's an absolute bitch. It really messes up your life.
It's crazy, huh? Just especially if you're having nightmares as well.
Yeah. So what other symptoms? But then just the shakes, they became a bit more frequent. And like I was going around my daily life and I was coping fine, but there were moments, and putting in things like putting a key in a lock, think, oh shit, is this going to work or not? And then towards the end, I would just do it with two hands rather than take 30 minutes, 30 seconds to put a key in a lock,
My mentor struggled to tie his shoes and things that you take for granted for years, just things like shoelaces or whatever. I have some of those like shakes at night, before you go to bed, or twitchy legs at night. And there's something a little bit disturbing about losing control over one's body. So this is the Embodiment podcast. A lot of listeners are interested in that. What's the sort of subjective experience like of going, for my whole life, I've controlled my body and now I can't in quite the same way?
Yeah, that was a bit of a kick in the nuts mentally. But I always went to the positive bias, not the negative bias. I didn't think, oh, fuck, my legs aren't working, or I've just emptied my bladder while talking to a friend in Marks and Spencer's food hall. True story, unfortunately. I just, and it wasn't head in the sand. It wasn't denial, but I just said, no, I'm not going to let myself feel bad or negative about this. Of course, I had dark moments, and stumbling around with that level of fatigue, you just think, oh Christ, this isn't good. But I think my self-regulation on that was pretty good.
What Paul talks to me about is that the fear, because he helps a lot of people with Parkinson's as well, and he says that putting the fear on top of the Parkinson's makes the symptoms far worse. In Buddhism, they call it the second arrow. The first arrow is the suffering. The second one is stressing about the suffering.
Yeah. Do you think the second part, the arrow, the stressing, do you think that's avoidable, or is that compulsory?
I think it's avoidable, or at least manageable. Like, he would do a lot of physiological kind of regulation, because he comes from a martial arts background. He has pretty good control of his muscles and physiology through that training. Some irony of having the illness there for him. But he tells me that's been very, very helpful in reducing the physiological fear response, which makes the symptomology worse. That's his take on it.
That's an interesting way to think of it. I don't think my experience was the same as his. I think the fear and the worry, it never really came in high volume. It never really impacted them massively. And that was just a very conscious decision on how I thought about that. But I totally accept that that's a really valid point. This hit the media. My story hit the media, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, or just over 2 years ago. And my main concern was, there's a lot of people out there really, really incapacitated by this disease. And they're going to think, who's this wanker? Did he really have Parkinson's? Did that really happen? Really, that can't happen just by exercising. And that was a huge concern. It's probably taken me 2 years of constantly being asked to comment, to do things. And to use a real cheesy expression, it kept coming to me. So I've now, in 2025, actively more involved in that environment. So sorry, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole there. I'm Irish, so
I've just got an Irish passport, actually, Scott. So I've got it. Just
have you?
Yeah, just want to move to Slovenia. So my granddad came over from the south, and that's my excuse for being verbose. So listen, let's talk about what you did. So there's the symptoms. You had this. You've just sort of alluded to the fact that you're symptom free at this point. What did you do that helped?
There were 3 things. One, that initial mindset, and throughout. a lot of people think that's bah humbug. I doubt you're in that camp, Mark, but you can train your brain. You can make it a habit, and your brain will pretty much give you an expectation of what you're going to feel and what you're going to do. Would you agree with that?
Mindset's incredibly powerful, and if you're able to train it, then it has huge impact for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's in joint first, and a lot of that's on reflection. The big story. I mean, if you Google Scott Hanley or drop the name of the YouTube and look at the various video clips, and there's a documentary part on YouTube. There is. It was coming into lockdown one. Oh, so we didn't know it was going to be lockdown. Sorry, spring 2020, and my weight was bad. My Parkinson's was just getting worse and worse. Life was getting pretty shit increasingly. So I made a very conscious decision that, right, that's enough. Playtime's over. You've got to start acting on this. So physically, I was just going downhill. And probably the hardest thing was going to your 6 monthly checkup with your neurologist, because you were totally exposed to future you. And, God love those people, and I wish them well, but I just thought, shit. So here's what I did. I had this thought that Parkinson's is caused by a part of my body being weak. If I want to get better pecs, I go to the gym and I bench press. If I want to get better biceps, I know what I would do to make them more efficient, stronger. So I had this real, very non-medical, what I would call crayons idea. Why not? Is it possible that this part of my brain, it's outside, substantia nigra, is it possible I could strengthen that by exercising it? And I just said, let's find out. And my logic on this was, I need to get my brain to work really, really hard. And what I did was, in spring 2020, was I was right, start exercising. You're fat twat at the minute as it is. And don't just get on a running machine or a spin bike. Only do exercise that's intense and something that you don't know what's coming next, or something that's skilled that you have no skill in. So what I mean by that is always listen to instructions and try to do new stuff, not getting on a spin bike, because I don't need to think about that.
To build neuroplasticity, like learning to be present with it.
Yeah, I think one of the first outputs whenever I was diagnosed was try to keep your brain active, like do new stuff to exercise your brain. I think like knitting or learn to play the piano or a musical instrument was examples that they cited. I just thought, well, what about if I can really, really exercise hard? So my body is screaming, my muscle and my lung capacity is screaming, but I want my brain to be screaming as well. And my logic was, that's how you exercise a weak part of your brain. That's how you strengthen it. And the plan started. I literally was about to push the button on it, and then COVID hit. So whilst all the mad people in the UK and Ireland were rushing out to buy toilet roll, I popped down to Argos and bought a few kettlebells and dumbbells and bits and pieces. I think at that point everybody knew the shutters were going to come down, and I started training in the back garden. This is in lockdown. So I started with boxing. Seemed really, really logical, because I'm not very good at it. It's pretty intense. Thankfully, I had a punch bag and some boxing gloves in the hinterland of the garage. And what I did was I got the headphones on. I downloaded apps and YouTubes. So I listened to it as I was working hard. So you think about it, you're listening to commands. So, jab, uppercut, cross, bob, weave. So you're really, really sweating and you're moving and you're fatigued, but you're always having to listen to instructions. And that was my plan. And it's what I call cognitively intense exercise. I don't know if that's a phrase elsewhere, but that's what I always refer to it as. So that was the second thing that I did, which was really where I saw the seismic shift really quickly. That was March, I think really by 7 or 8 months in, I'm going, holy shit, my symptoms are really decreasing. They hadn't gone, but they were really decreasing. And I think that was probably really what was the most significant contributor. But it wouldn't have happened without the right mindset. And then the third part was lose a bit of weight through time restricted eating and fasting. And I do try to watch my diet, but anybody listening to this that knows me is that's always a work in progress.
Always, yeah.
So those are the three things.
Classic things, really: mindset, exercise, diet. Is this not common for Parkinson's sufferers to be kind of recommended these kind of things?
Most of the media that I've done is with the US, and of course the US healthcare system could not be more different than the National Health Service. I have utter respect for the National Health Service, but it's the public purse. So if some bold Irish guy starts saying, hey, look at this, try this. Yeah, they're interested, of course. The last time I saw my neurologist, there was 2 guest neurologists there as well. But they've got to have like a 3-year trial before they do this and do that. There is a slow movement towards recommending that. But my original media that went out, I sort of said, this is a story that needs to be heard. And here's the thing, where's the downside? Yeah. If you get a better core, you get better at getting up when you fall down, regardless if you've got Parkinson's. This is for anybody getting to an age of any gender. It's kind of win-win. Now, the day that we're recording this is really timely, Mark, because just yesterday, and I don't know how I haven't come across this before, I came across a report by Yale Medicine, who did a trial. It wasn't a huge sample, on high intensity exercise on Parkinson's sufferers. All right. And people have said, surely that can't happen. And neurology goes, that doesn't work, Yeah, maybe you progress the slowdown, but you can't reverse it. Well, the article from Yale Medicine totally agrees. It said high intensity exercise that they did with a sample of Parkinson's sufferers, they reversed their symptoms. They did exactly what I've done.
Clear, Scott, where are you at now?
I'd say I'm 95% symptom free. I might be 100%, but I want to keep my integrity with this. So I sometimes have a bit of a cramp. Sometimes we get a bit of muscle spasm. But if you're active and you're lifting heavy things and you're going to the gym, I think
most gym guys get the odd twitch here and there and the odd cramp. I mean,
yeah. So like maybe I'm 100%, but I just say 95% because I don't want to be a douchebag. I want to keep my integrity on that.
You had before, by the sounds of things, like anyone who knows.
No, like none.
Wow, this is a big change.
Yeah, I was pretty good at masking it, but yeah, people close to me. Yeah, no, night and day. Like it's not like the symptoms are sort of gone. Like they are gone. I'm talking about twitchy hand, restless legs, excessive cramping, nightmares, erectile dysfunction, urinary incontinence, cognitive capacity. Like those are things that you notice if they're there or not there. None of those are present now.
My doctor asked me if I had erectile dysfunction. I just said, I think I've just been married a while. Do you know what I mean? It just goes away after a while. But sorry, excuse the joke. So how rare is it for reversals of symptomology?
Whenever I reported it, whenever I saw my neurologist, and there was 2 other guest neurologists in the room, this was, in real life with obviously all that COVID nonsense, and we're having consultations on phone, but they said, so between they had whatever it was, 78 years of neurology, they said that they'd never heard of anybody ever having done it in Western medicine. But I know I'm not on my own, because a lot of people have reached out to me. I've made myself very accessible, and I know other people have had the same experience as me. And lo and behold, the publication by Yale that I discovered yesterday, it was done in February 24, so it's a year old. They conclude the same. So, but it's generally, no, it's just not on the treatment radar.
Intense exercises, running with a log, dragging a log. He finds it helpful to sort of push into the ground and have that kind of intensity. And he says that's been very helpful. He's certainly slowed symptoms far more than is typical. It surprised his doctors.
That's great news. I don't know what the cognitive intensity of pushing a log into the ground is.
He teaches Aikido as well, and studies Aikido, which is one of the more cognitively complex martial arts to learn.
Yeah, it would be actually,
It was a study showing it had the same complexity as ballet in terms of the difficulty and refinement of the movements. So I think that's probably helpful.
Oh, that would be spot on for what I'm talking about.
CrossFit as well, right? I mean, I was just in a CrossFit gym in Austin, Texas, and those guys, it's pretty hardcore. They look like they're having fun, but pretty hardcore.
So I would say like 65%. I don't know. Let's not put numbers on it. My symptoms had really, really declined, and this is still in 2020. But it then seemed to plateau. A couple of things was I was in the back garden or inside the house, and I was running out of things that I could do to challenge me. So the beginners session at the box, I found it really difficult. I was now on the advanced and I wasn't finding it difficult. So I sort of run out of things to do and I was losing a bit of momentum. So where CrossFit comes in is I had a friend, Barry, was a bit of a CrossFit nut for years, and he would always reference it. So I had a base knowledge from conversations with Barry about this, and I just thought, right, shit, that looks like the logical progression for me to do cognitively really intense things. So as soon as the COVID restrictions were lifted, I went on Google Maps. So there's a CrossFit gym, 6-minute drive from me, it turned out. And I went down and signed up.
So for listeners, CrossFit is known as sort of pull-ups and push-ups, things like that, weightlifting, but it's also got a skill element to it, right? There's a certain amount of gymnastic skill in it.
Yeah. So absolutely right. So it became pretty obvious pretty quick that CrossFit was the magic sauce, was the last thing that was going to get me round the corner and down the final length and across the finish line, which it did. So to answer your question, yeah, you could walk in, you could be doing all sorts of weird things, but even lifting a barbell in a particular way, it requires precision and knowledge and expertise. And, I didn't know what a half Romanian get up or a hang power snatch and all this stuff was. So you're really, really having to think. And it's not like just going to a class. This is where CrossFit, I think, is different to a standard commercial gym. And there's lots of independent functional gyms as well, but you are coached and it's small groups. So probably the bit that I work hardest at is listening to the instructions. So whenever I'm doing a simple movement that I think I know well, but I'm not awesome at it, I'm thinking about what did I hear there? So I want my hip to be in that position. I want my weight to be on my heels. I want to brace my glutes, and I only want to lift the bar at that one movement. So I'm still to this day, 3 years later, more than 3 years later, I want to think about it. So there's lots of thinking to do.
Don't they? Every few weeks they'll change.
Yeah, you haven't a clue. Yeah. I've had a bad 3 months of CrossFit with a few injuries and just a few life events. So looking forward to getting back into it. But yeah, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it'll be totally different. And the programming the last 4 weeks in the gym, they're doing, I don't know where they're getting their programming from, but at my gym, there's stuff that I have not seen, done, or even heard of in 3.5 years of CrossFit. So I'm having to go in there. It's going to really be hard to do. And I'm really going to have to think.
Clean and jerk, and I didn't get either. I was really disappointed. But no, they.
Oh dear, where was that?
I mean, I love the creativity of it, and that novelty, I think, keeps people's brains working, right? So your body's working, your brain's working, and I think there's a third piece to CrossFit, which is that it's communal. So there's a certain sort of co-regulation to it.
You beat me to it. Right. Okay. So. I don't think this is relevant to Parkinson's, but it's definitely relevant to my life. You know, post CrossFit is the community aspect of it. I had no expectation on that at all, but the community around that was freaking awesome, and it makes you want to go, and you just feel so good now. You know, there's some gyms, I can only comment from my experience, but there's some gyms where what I call all the Insta wankers, where they spend more time setting up their camera to take a picture, and they're in their branded gear and all that. You know, CrossFit Belfast is nothing like that. It's just punters in the, you know, in the t-shirt that they did from a 5K run. There's no egos. There's none of that in that. But the power of that community to get me through a lot of other things that has happened in my life over the last few years has been amazing. And it's a good reminder that, you know, the world is really losing that badly. And obviously I joined CrossFit literally day one after the lockdown rules. So everybody had been, you know, in the house with one group of people and had no community. I also coached rugby to a fairly youthful age range. I suppose most rugby players are pretty young. And it's, you know, it's not at elite level, far from it. It's more like Jamaican bobsleigh team vibes, but it's great fun. And the difference post-COVID, those next 2 years, getting 18, 19, 20-year-olds to engage in rugby. You know, there really was a lost generation there. Not generation.
Shout out to Solar CrossFit, who made me feel very welcome in Austin. There's always good vibes there, you know, like I was mostly just using the gym, but there was just a good crew, good vibes, good feeling, good positivity, very encouraging, always. You know, whether people were old, young, thin, fat, whatever. I've also noticed this. It feels like the communal nervous system and the social skills of all of society, particularly young people, all of society, hasn't quite recovered since COVID. We're worse at being together now.
We are, and that fills me with fear and dread for what's to happen over the next 10, 20 years. And I don't quite know how we reverse that, but I'd love that to be reversed. I think, you know, the thought of just getting out and playing a team sport and, you know, not working from home as a default and bitch and moan that, God forbid, the person that's paying your salary might want you to attend a place of work.
It. Yeah, how rude.
Mean, yeah. And so I think, yeah, that's something that's missing. And it was really, really noticeable with those rugby players trying to recruit.
Specifically, that was noticeable with the youth rugby.
There wasn't the same. There was no will or desire. You know, it comes just the oomph, or was it confidence? I don't know, because, you know, we did a good lot of seasons, and you come to pre-season in August, you know, you get a good hardcore, and then that would build on it whenever word of mouth got about. They just didn't show up. And I kind of understand it. Those were lads, 16, 17, 18, so up to their A levels, their formative years, you know, they learned to drive, the school ski trip, the football or rugby competition or cup, the leavers holiday to Magaluf to get a tattoo and an STI. Like they were robbed of all of that. And Northern Ireland was a lot worse than England. Northern Ireland and Scotland's rules were way stricter. My daughter was working in London.
That's interesting.
And, you know, her experience was very different to the other daughter who was at university in Glasgow, and then to us in Northern Ireland. But yeah, they oomph. It just wasn't the desire. And sorry, go on. It wasn't just our club. I'm based in Belfast, and we are governed by Ulster Rugby, and every club was the same.
Multiple guests and multiple people, slightly different depending on the country, as you say, different, Spain, Italy, different places. There seems to be a formative window, and if that window is missed, certain skills may never get developed, is my worry. In the same way as children have a window to learn language, I think teenagers have a window to learn certain social skills. And if that window is missed, it may be a problem forever, is my concern, though, the brain's still neuroplastic, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I've heard the same, and I have the same concern. I think as well in the perfect storm there, the accessibility of media and the rise of social media, that all happened in around the same time.
Gaming,
whenever
there was a number of technologies that replaced, in a kind of pseudo way, the normal interactions of young people socializing, young people dating, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's sort of a load of friends on Snapchat and Instagram and platforms I've never heard of because I'm old, and they think those are real relationships and real friendships. I talked to a young nephew of mine recently, and he was talking about all these friends. I thought, oh, that's great. But one was in, I don't know, San Diego, one was in Helsinki. Look, there were real people, but he had a really good connection with them, but I don't know. And so those boys and girls in those formative years, your point you've made is just right, but it's the mums and the dads, and the 30, 40-year-olds plus, where, they just want to work from home.
Yeah, that's become sort of the new norm, hasn't it now? And I something about that leaving the house. I've done co-working quite a lot when I didn't have to, and I put on a shirt like I am today for work that I don't have to. Even when I don't do the podcast, I put on a shirt,
Same.
Or a different jumper at least. Put real trousers on. I've got real trousers on, even though I'm on a podcast where you can't see them. I'm not going to be there in my dirty boxers.
I'm wearing Speedos.
I don't want to think about that, Scott. I don't want to think about it. And it's like there's something about that ritual of leaving the house, even a small commute, going to work, and then psychologically distancing, coming home, being able to take off the suit, being able to take off the builder's fatigues, whatever it is. There's something healthy in that. When it's all sort of mushed together in one's own house, particularly if you've got a small house, you're not like a rich person that's got I'm lucky, I've got a spare bedroom that I use as an office. Not everyone's got that. I think there's something unhealthy about that lack of boundaries.
I think every aspect of it is unhealthy. It's convenient for walking the dog, doing the messages. None of it's healthy. I just don't know how we reverse out of that situation and get back to where we were.
Have some discipline around it. Like me and my girlfriend have agreements. Like I was WhatsApping on the couch and she said, "Hey, is that work?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." She sort of made me stop because that's the agreement we have. And no phones in certain rooms of the house. Separate office if you can. Work clothes. Sort of. I see young guys getting into wearing suits again, and it's like they're rediscovering some of these things. I think the kids do get it. Like a lot of young people have stopped internet dating because they've realized it's bullshit. So that's kind of gone out of fashion amongst the sort of younger guys I'm speaking to. They're like, no, I got a real girlfriend, they'll say, not one from Tinder. And I'll be like, oh, wow, good for you, man. So maybe it's sort of retro kind of almost is coming back,
I don't know if that's hit my rugby team yet, but I'll ask. Yeah, no, I agree. And that isn't that lovely to see. I wonder what percentage is doing that. I was in Lombok in Indonesia and out that part of the world, and British Airways cancelled my domestic flight after a 15-hour flight from Singapore. They then cancelled my flight onwards homeward to Belfast. Anyway, getting to the point, I just went into town and killed 5 or 6 hours, and I had brunch, and it was all full of people in suits and busy. And I just thought, oh, it does feel like a bit of a vibe here. That's good. I mean, it was the same old bullshit, but they weren't in their Speedos on on Teams or whatever, their Zoom or whatever it is,
wrap up soon. What are some of your like key takeaways for everyone listening to this who doesn't have Parkinson's? Like, what would be some of your sort of like, hey, you've lived a bit in different ways, let's be honest. So what would be some of your like top, everyone should do this stuff or know this stuff, even if you're never going to have Parkinson's in your life?
If you're not 100% happy with your life, I mean, if you are, that's amazing. And doesn't matter what level you're at. If you are, that's brilliant. If there's any dissatisfaction, I think my tips would be, don't just ignore it. Be curious about it. And whenever you're curious about it, maybe educate yourself a bit about it. So get your hands on some material and get to a point of view. And that's probably going to be quite hard, but I'm a big fan of Matthew McConaughey, and his saying, I think, holds very true to everybody, is it's easy to know where you don't want to be. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to work out what you want to be or where you want to be in life, maybe you start by working out what you definitely don't want to be or you don't want to be doing. So be curious, educate yourself, and at some point, the knowledge gap gets closer. And you have to make it a habit. So there's lots of things we can do to make that thought a habit. And then you've got to act, and you've got to put in the reps. It's not going to happen in 7 days or 21 days. Yeah. Be curious, educate yourself, be conscious with your habits in regard to whatever change you want to make. And then act and give it at least 3 months. And I think if you pull all that stuff together, you'd be quite surprised. 3 months
is the critical, like 90 days in AA, for example, it's often recommended for sobriety.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it really depends your starting point. And for some people, what they want to achieve is to be able to leave their house apartment and not be terrified of getting on a bus or public transport or going into public places. And for others, it's want to improve themselves at work and maybe very high functioning, to the first example I cited. So I suppose saying 3 months is maybe a bit foolish in some regard. It depends where you are and where you want to get to. I think I'm just saying is, for real change to happen, you've got to persist.
Got to do the reps, got to put the practice in. That's what anyone who knows fitness knows. They apply that to elsewhere and do well. So,
Scott,
and
where do
people find you online? People want to get in touch. Anything you want to point people to?
Yeah. So as I intimated earlier, I'm only really going professional on this in 2025, so we're at ground zero, but it's been very exciting. Hopefully by the time this podcast is broadcast, then Thrive Happens, which is my brand, thrivehappens.com. My preferred social media platform, which is active now, is Thrive_Happens on Instagram.
Nice. Okay.
Either of those, you'll find me on that.
Instagram. Scott, thank you very much for joining us.